Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my entitled neighbor claims he now owns my property and dug out a massive lake on my land while I was deployed. I taught him a lesson about never messing with a soldier. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the stories. Ever since I was a kid, I had always known what I wanted to be when I grew up. Everyone assumed it was foolish that I wanted to join the military forces even after the fact that my own father lost his life whilst being enlisted. I still wanted to be a soldier because I've always held the values that my father taught me very close to my heart. My mom and I always had massive respect for how he served the country fearlessly. Even on the day that cancer finally took her life, she told me how proud she was that I am following in my father's footsteps. Joining the army definitely had its perks as well. What always blew me away was the amount of respect that people had for the uniform and those that wore it. After losing both my parents, I could have chosen to move into the army quarters, but the people who lived in the neighborhood of my childhood home felt an awful lot like family, so I could never truly leave them behind. They all had an immense amount of respect for my dad, and once I enlisted, I inherited both the property as well as the bond he shared with the people who lived around it. They made sure that even though I was coming back to an empty house after being deployed, it still felt like coming home. Needless to say, there are always exceptions to any group of people, and in my neighborhood, it was some guy called Gregory. He had purchased and moved into the property right beside mine a few years back, and he never really understood why the rest of the people in my street got along very well with me. He was a very hard-headed man who found it hard to make friends, and he made no effort to hide the fact that he was jealous of my popularity. The last time I came back from training for a small break, everyone held a welcome back backyard barbecue. Gregory was invited too, but after watching everyone pay a little bit of attention towards me, he decided to call the cops, complaining that his neighbors were being extremely noisy whilst hosting an illegal party. Once the cops arrived at the scene, it was pretty obvious that no one was being a menace to society at an afternoon barbecue except a person who called to make a false complaint, so they immediately left after apologizing. It certainly helped that the gathering was to welcome someone who risks their life and fights for the country 1,000 miles away from home. He seemed to hate me the most, but that did not mean he was particularly nice to anyone else. He simply could not comprehend that people were capable of having fun without him. When one of the residents hosted a birthday party for their 6-year-old daughter, Gregory decided that he ought to go make the kid cry for wanting a gift. He yelled at her about how she was poorly raised for being so selfish. Though he would go out of his way to be a pain, I would usually just ignore his antics. I did not get to spend a lot of time back home, and whatever few moments I had, I refused to spend those worrying over an insecure man whom I did not care about. When you have your priorities in order, it is quite hard to let anyone affect your peace. However, when I came back home this time after being deployed for over a year in the Middle East, I was appalled by what he had done. It is true that I had been gone a very long time and I almost didn't make it back. Since I had no immediate kin to be informed about major injuries or death, the people on my street had been vaguely notified about how a landmine had me bedridden. For a while, everyone around me almost thought I would not be able to make it, but after months of intense treatment, I not only made a recovery but was also able to walk properly. I intended to surprise everyone back home when I returned, but I was shocked to my core to find that my property had a giant hole that was filled with water. Gregory had decided that since I was dead, supposedly in another land, he could use this opportunity to expand his property. He had torn down the common fence that separated our lands and dug up my garden in hopes of converting it into a lake. All the time I had spent trying to nurture my plants so they could flower one day had been rendered useless. The artificial lake he had constructed had a shed right beside it. I was told that he used this spot to have grills for his guests. He barely ever had guests owing to his horrible personality, but for some reason he just needed a place to grill with his guests. So to top this all off, he even built a fence completely encroaching on my entire property, despite having his own. I could not even enter my own home when I returned. This left me absolutely furious. I hated abusing my power, but it did not feel like an abuse of power when I used my contacts to have him immediately taken to the police station. When he was being dragged away in handcuffs, he put up quite a struggle and very loudly pleaded to the other neighbors who were standing by to speak up in his defense. Obviously, nobody else was going to use the "I thought he was dead" as a defense to illegally occupying someone's property. I proceeded to sue him for illegal trespassing and property damage. The court does not take kindly to people who commit offenses against army personnel. It was not very surprising that he was mandated to pay me over $500,000. This pushed Gregory to bankruptcy, and he could no longer afford to keep his huge property and had to move away. Needless to say, nobody really missed him. Even during the time I was deployed, he was horrible to all the people around him and never thought twice about stepping on other people's happiness just to be the center of attention. Once he was gone, we decided to actually put the grill and the lake to use. With the money I won from the lawsuit, I renovated the shed to be more accommodating. I restored the small lake as well and planted more saplings beside it. Everyone in the neighborhood was finally able to have a gathering in peace, and a new grill certainly made it better. And yeah, Ripe Stars, that's certainly one way to turn this situation around, but I gotta say, that has to be one of the dumbest entitled people neighbors we have ever heard about. How do you even get the idea to create a lake on someone else's property? What an idiot. Anyway, the next one is titled Big Revenge. A few years back, I had my identity stolen right in the middle of a mental health crisis. I was already stressed out and overwhelmed by life, and the identity theft just made everything worse. Suddenly, random purchases like iPhones and laptops were showing up on my bills, purchases I had never made. The identity thief opened credit cards with my identity, bank accounts, you name it. The authorities were of course no help, and I felt very alone in this twisted game of whack-a-mole, where every time I thought I had fixed one problem, another popped up. I even had a rental car company come after me as the thief had rented a car in my name and then stolen it. Of course, this was a blow to my credit as well, and resolving the whole thing was enormously stressful. Eventually, I had frozen my accounts, contested the charges, cancelled the credit cards, and followed all of the appropriate steps. All that was left to do was close the fraudulent bank account. When I went to do so, however, I was met with a snag. I explained the situation to the bank, which was not a bank I personally used, and requested they close the account. They told me that they could not just delete the account, however, as there was still money in it, approximately $800, which would need to be withdrawn. I explained that that was not technically my money, and they replied that the account could not be closed with the money remaining inside. An account that I opened in which I, Corvidius, put my money. So guess who is $800 richer? After all the identity thief took from me, it seemed like appropriate recompense and only fair to take a little something back. And the next one is titled Check Out Revenge. So I was reading another post on here that reminded me of a petty act of revenge I did a while back. I had popped into my local supermarket for a few essentials. It was pretty busy, but I had noticed that the self-checkout queues tended to have folks with only a few items each. So while the queue was longer, it was flowing quicker. I only had a handful of items myself, so I joined the queue. In this particular supermarket, there were 8 self-checkout machines, with the middle pair being back-to-back, think 2 squares side by side. Each square had its own queue, both being roughly the same length. I was stood in the queue for the right-hand side square. I was 3 places from the front of the queue when a woman approached from the left, spotted an empty checkout that the person at the front of the left queue was just picking up their basket to go to, and then cut straight in front of everybody. Now, if she was just scanning a sandwich and a drink, I don't think anybody would have been too bothered, but she had a trolley full of stuff, so she would be there for a while. Being British, nothing more was said other than some mild tutting. Anyway, as it was my turn to check out my items, I noticed the machine I was using was directly opposite the woman who had cut in line earlier. She had just about finished scanning everything, which had taken a little while given how much stuff she had. I also noticed that the power switches for the self-checkouts were very much in range of my feet. Whoever had laid out the store had handily written the numbers 6 and 7 on the plugs, which corresponded to the number 6 on the back of her machine and assumedly the number 7 on the back of mine. As she had just bagged her last item, I gave the power switch a gentle kick. In the UK, all plug sockets have an individual switch that will shut off power to the socket. A confused reaction from the other side confirmed that the machine had shut down. Then flick the switch back on again, the machine starts booting up. She stood there with a puzzled look on her face, which swiftly turned to anger as she realized she would have to scan everything all over again. I don't know if the supermarket staff had seen me do what I did, but she called one of them over and he very dryly said, "The machine crashed. You will have to rescan your shopping once it's restarted or use a staff till. Make sure you remove your items from the bagging area first." She did not look particularly impressed at this and started swearing under her breath. I'm not very good at keeping a straight face, so I swiftly finished scanning my items and then left. By the time I had gotten to my car, it had been another couple of minutes and I purposely drove by the front of the shop. She was still scanning away. And the next one is titled Smoking Neighbor. So, the mother of all Karens lives next door and unsurprisingly, she is not very neighborly or considerate. She chain smokes every day in her back garden approximately 2 meters away from my bedroom window and it wafts over, leaving me unable to enjoy my garden, unable to open my windows in the summer and unable to dry laundry in the garden as it ends up smelling like an ashtray. I have politely let her know that I have asthma and it is affecting my quality of life. I discussed that all I can do is kindly suggest that if she could ever smoke in her front garden instead if she sees my windows are open or that my washing is out, it would be greatly appreciated. There was no change to her behavior and she did not take it well. And then there is the glorious verbal abuse shouted over the fence at me. The one time I used my garden with friends, she complained about moderate noise of conversations and laughter at 8 p.m, yet said neighbor blares music on a weekly basis so loudly that I can hear the lyrics to the songs she is listening to. She regularly shouts over the fence that she is unhappy about the state of our landlord's garden, but as it is a rental property, I can only do so much to fix it. Last summer, the garden was covered like a jungle in out-of-control tall weeds and had a huge stack of rotten furniture from former tenants. I decided to do all the weeding, which was a horrendous task that took many grueling weekends of my own work. I had to tolerate her chain smoking while doing this task and it makes me feel quite ill. I also called my local council to collect the rotten furniture, paid for out of my own pocket. And when I was on the phone to the council sending the itinerary of items to be collected, said neighbor started abruptly shouting at me to shut up from her window. This was the only other occasion I have spoken audibly in my garden other than the time I had a few friends over for dinner. The revenge for the shouting? After the call, I audibly retorted, "So you don't want me to sort out the garden then, huh? Don't worry, after this I won't put down weed killer or do the garden again." Since that day, I've let the weeds get out of control. Only a year on, the garden looks like a jungle again, with human-high tree-like weeds sprouting everywhere and covering every inch of my garden. It looks like the garden of a haunted house and I know it will drive my neighbor mad, especially because she knows it is a result of her own actions. When she looks out of her window, the view of my horrible garden will ruin her perfect one. I can hear her muttering about it from time to time. Revenge for the chain smoking affecting my quality of life and basic enjoyment of my home? I may have found a delectable fart-scented spray called Liquid Ass I'm contemplating spritzing out the window and over the fence. Reviews online describe the product as revolting, overwhelming and strong enough to induce coughing and gagging. I am quite tempted to use it to encourage her to smoke in her front garden instead. And the next one is titled Karen's Hot Tub. So the previous owner of my house, H, called a few days ago interested in buying the hot tub I have on my lower deck. I bought the house from him including the hot tub and shed. When he sold the property to me, he was in an on and off again relationship with his now wife Karen. I told him in the first phone call I would want time to think on it and do some research. I don't use the hot tub, haven't in a year I have lived here, so I was open to selling it. Through his own admission, it was worth $12,000 brand new 2 years ago and has seen very light use. No cosmetic damage besides being dirty, so while playing phone tag with him over the next couple days, I had the number of around 8 to 9K to be expected for it. Out of the blue 2 days ago, Karen calls me and begins to chat with me about the hot tub. I start with asking how they plan to move it and she says they will hire professional movers, and then I asked what they were thinking as far as pricing goes. She goes into this long monologue about how they have put in a lot of sweat equity into the home, they were the ones to buy it and set it up, yada yada yada, and then tells me they are looking around 3K for it. Taken aback a bit, I told her I would have to think on it and that further negotiations would probably be coming. She sounded very annoyed and rushed the entire time on the phone with me, like she was working and I was inconveniencing her even though she called me. Fast forward to today. Obviously, I decided to not go through with the sale, and to be gentle about it, I called H and told him that I didn't want to sell it because it's part of the home's value. Partially true, but I didn't want to come out and say that they, or rather Karen, tried to offensively lowball me. H was very understanding and asked me, sounding almost scared, to please text Karen and let her know before H got home. Weird request at the time, but okay, sure. Then I come to find out I am sure he knew what her reaction would be and didn't want to take the full heat for it. I texted her explaining what I told H and she texted me back, "We left you a super clean place. It had mold and had a lot of sweat equity invested. A couch and a shed a company put in. You personally did not make those improvements. I made others. Yet you will capitalize on those improvements. That's how real estate works." She then went on to call me as greedy as the market and that asking for the tub was not unreasonable because it was barely used at all. And also best wishes on getting what you think you deserve out of our improvements. I have yet to send a reply because I have no idea what to say to her. Edit: the home sale process was different than a typical closing. I live in a park model on leased land. I own the home and all improvements on the land. I bought directly from the previous owner, with due diligence of course, including the title and a bill of sale and supporting documents as to what went with the property. And wouldn't you guess, that includes the hot tub. Edit number 2, a couple of people have mentioned depreciation on the hot tub and that in the majority of cases it does not add much value to the home, but for me selling or not selling the hot tub was not that deep. I did not have to sell it or really have a large desire to do so, so if I did not feel it's personally worth it to me, I was not gonna sell it. In most cases, yeah, what I wanted might have been a lot for it. But they had other options than buying mine. They live 45 minutes closer to the store they bought mine from and would still be paying significantly less than getting a new one and setting it up. In my neighborhood, a lot of the homes are bought as vacation rentals, Airbnbs and retirement spots. The vast majority of them, to me, keeping the hot tub and selling it with the house is worth more than 3K and having to deal with Karen and H. This is not my first experience with them being entitled, just the most pronounced. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say I'm on OP's side here. I would definitely not want to have to deal with K and H. I would probably even sell my house or hot tub or whatever at a loss to not have to deal with a person like Karen and H. Either way, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments and maybe even like the video if you want to support me. And the next one is titled, "Am I the a-hole for threatening my new neighbors with my dog?" For some context, I, female 28, just moved from my city to my first house in a suburban neighborhood about 6 months ago. Just me and my dog Oaken, a Dutch Shepherd. My dog is trained as a personal protection dog, PPD. I am a runner and Oaken runs with me. We were running in our neighborhood's park and pond area. I had my AirPods in, it was just getting dark. I had noticed in passing a guy on his bike on the same trails, and as we were coming around the pond he was stopped on our path. He waved us down and said he had dropped his keys, asked if I had seen them on the path, asked if I had a light on me because he thinks he dropped them in the grass. He wanted to know if I lived in the neighborhood, which house was mine, and if I was nearby because he did not see any cars in the parking area that he did not recognize. Basically anything to keep us there and keep talking. Not really scary, but annoying with a definite hint of creepy. After he forgot his initial story and said, "I'm gonna be so pissed at myself if I lost another earbud. That's my third pair and they are nearly 300 bucks a pop." I moved to leave and he stood in the path and started asking about Oaken. Oaken was not doing anything aggressive at this point, no hair raised, no growling or barking. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do, and every time the guy would move to get closer to us, he would just stand between me and him. The guy asked if he was friendly, asked to pet him, and I said I would rather he not. He kept saying dogs loved him, blah blah blah. I again said no and we started to walk around the guy to go. That's when he decided it would be a good idea to try to grab Oaken's leash. I have no idea why, your guess is as good as mine. Oaken backed us up, low growl, showed his teeth, did not snap, did not bite, but we left. The encounter was strange enough. I posted in the neighborhood app, nothing accusing the guy of attacking us or anything over the top like that, just that my dog and I had gotten stopped by a stranger out running, and a reminder not to grab at a person's dog or a dog leash without permission. Apparently, Park Guy's wife read the post and recognized her husband immediately because since then she's been telling every neighbor who will listen about my aggressive attack dog. I have now gotten a letter from the HOA, and apparently the next homeowners meeting has breed-specific bans on the agenda. While I believe Oaken's response was appropriate and controlled, I am feeling sad and disappointed that my new community has the wrong impression. I'm not out to terrify people. So guys, am I the a-hole for posting what I posted to the neighborhood app and apparently starting a feud with my new neighbor? Was I wrong for calling out Park Guy publicly? Edit number 1, yes, I have a home security system and cameras. The previous homeowners had a couple of collectible cars in the detached garage/apartment and put in an extensive system. Park Guy's questions about where I lived, etc. did not immediately set off crazy red flags because I've been asked very similar questions by multiple women multiple times in the neighborhood too. I'm getting the impression I'm the youngest person in the area by a good 20 or more years because people have asked me who my parents are, who I am visiting, etc. It seems like the only young people hanging around are ones who drive in from other places to get to the park, and this neighborhood seems weirdly territorial about their park. I will definitely talk to an officer about a report. Edit number 2, thank you very much Reddit for the kind support and the overall objective and outside look into the situation. I did contact the local police department and they sent 2 officers out yesterday. I walked them through the situation, at what point I felt uncomfortable and exactly how the neighbor, then unknown to me, stood to block me and reached for my dog's leash. I gave them my written account and a couple of pictures of exactly where everything happened. I showed them the post in Nextdoor. The officers were both very encouraging that I had done the right thing by contacting them, although one of them did admit she groaned a little when she got the dispatch to our neighborhood. Apparently this neighborhood has a habit of calling in and reporting suspicious behavior that boils down to people who don't live here using park equipment, fishing in the pond, or just looking suspicious walking down the street. While there is not technically a gate at the front entrance and there are walking paths around some of the walled off areas and into the park, the residents feel pretty exclusive about our private gated community, and it's the perfect environment for the ladies whose names start with K to thrive. The officers went to speak to the neighbor and also his wife, and he admitted to chatting me up because he did not recognize me and wanted to know what I was doing there, but he denied he was actually trying to detain me. He said he saw that my dog had embroidery on his leash and was looking to see if it was an address. The officers gave him a pretty extensive talking to on how inappropriate his behavior was and how lucky he was he did not actually put his hands on me or get the leash, and how lucky he was he had not tried to intimidate me further with a weapon or threat. They advised him it would be a good idea if he steered clear of me in the future, and if he has an actual concern about someone in the neighborhood or in the park, to leave it up to law enforcement. His wife apparently tried to convince the cops that I should be thankful people in this neighborhood look out for one another, and the officer said they very professionally laughed in her face. Everything is on record now, and I plan on penning a preemptive letter including the police report as an attachment and sending it to the HOA, letting them know that if breed-specific motions are on the agenda next meeting, I would like to present said information in person. A user in the comments said, "Not the a-hole, make sure to tell everyone about her aggressive predator husband." Another user said, "Not the a-hole, that interaction was really creepy, and frankly the guy is lucky that your dog is as well trained as he is, otherwise he may have been bitten. Don't feel sad, just explain what happened and why you felt uneasy and what exactly led up to your dog displaying protectiveness."